The amazing Amy Shell. I'm not really sure of her name, but she is
the amazing Emma.
She is.
Emma.
She is amazing.
Yes.
Are the YIPS a real thing? I'm a football fan. I'm not a huge baseball fan. So YIPS?
Have you ever seen, when we get off here, Google Charles Barkley's golf swing. Have you ever seen Charles Barkley's golf swing?
No. Does that have to do with YIPS?
After we do that, yeah, he's got the YIPS.
Random?
He can't swing the club anymore. He stops.
It's a real
and
thing.
He can't get through it. It's the most awkward.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why YIPS? Why YIPS?
I don't actually myself know the origin of that word, but I mean, I first became aware of it as in baseball. Baseball is the thing where that's where I'm most familiar. That is shown on numerous occasions with players who
it comes
something happens.
So a player by the name of Domer Dalby, they called him Yippity Doodah because of his name, and so he got the yips, and so then it was after that it was.
Are you totally making this up?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like watching Kurt to see if like
Domer.
Perfect example.
Wait.
Domer
Dolby.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, wait a minute. I've never heard that name in Major League Baseball.
Yippity Doodah. He was he played catcher for the. Yeah.
I do have thoughts other than yips. I have 3 thoughts. One was, and sometimes Pep and I will say, we say stuff and then Kurt makes sense of it. So there might be a bit of this happening in my.
It's my hope every time I open my mouth.
No, I'm like, okay, don't let this be the time that Kurt's like, I have no idea.
Well, I thought that Pepper was about to make sense of the yips, and then we come to find out that, like,
story of our lives. Yeah.
Right. I'm just on the edge of my seat, about to like discover some new insight,
right?
Because Pepper is opening. He is opening the world to me. And he's like, no, I'm totally making that up.
Yeah. When you started talking about like that feelings used to trump, like that was really what people, that felt like freedom, that felt like whatever, that was the thing. When you then moved us to the body, just started talking about the body, I could feel it, like it felt like a relief. Because feelings to me are so like uncontrollable, or like sometimes you can, and it's like the body, it just, even in this moment, just felt like, oh, what a relief.
Right. And I think too, like this whole conflict that kind of emerged, kind of in the history of the West with Descartes and Rousseau and all the rest, all of that also would have felt kind of foreign, I think, to a first century Hebrew. I mean, to a first century Christian. Like, there was a sense in which, yes, so much of life had become so regimented in so many ways that, and in fact, paying attention to the inner life was a very Hebrew thing to do, but never apart from the body. But when the pendulum swings so far in such a direction that you just have a bunch of rules whereby which people have to apply their bodies, where what I'm feeling doesn't really matter. The church says this, this, and this, you just have to do these things. After a while, the inner life seems to be disconnected from that. And so at the time, there were scientific investigators that were kind of telling the leaders of the Catholic Church, the material world is all that there really is. And Descartes was recruited by the Pope to defend the faith. And Descartes said, well, gosh, I can think. And thinking makes me who I am. And and that's who I ultimately am. So I don't have to worry about science. This is his attempt to prove the validity of faith, what I'm thinking. Without recognizing that then that really actually just enabled science to push the church further and further and further to the margin, because the more and more and more the material world that we could measure without having to talk about God as being in the process, the less and less we needed God. And so then all we're left with in the spiritual realm is what I feel, it's what I think. that
Right.
becomes the most real thing that then gets hijacked to become kind of what we're doing in today's world. And so when we get back, when we bring the body back into it, there is a felt sense of like, oh, it's a relief to
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because my but the Catholic Church in particular, I think today's there is an emphasis on both the mysticism and the body. You know, I mean, you don't see
yeah.
crucifixes like you do in the Catholic Church and a lot of other churches. It's that, you know,
Oh,
they're
mm-hmm.
very emphasized the body of Christ. They're very, you know, it's but then there's also, you know, the mystic side of it as
Yeah.
well. It's just
Right.
interesting that
Yeah. Right. I
Um,
mean, you know, it's funny. I grew up in a house where the whole notion, I had an aunt, a distant aunt, the first funeral that I ever remember going to when I was like 3 years old. She was Catholic, and it was a full mass Catholic funeral
oh my gosh.
with all of the incense. Like I still remember it to this day. And I remember being in her house, and at the top of her stairs there was a crucifix. And like I grew up in this evangelical Quaker tradition, and my parents were very quick to point out to me like that's not real. Jesus is no longer on the cross. Like all this, I'm like, okay,
I got it.
there's
I got it.
something wrong with that. Something wrong with the crucifix. I'm in a very different place today, right? I mean, it is a way for us to remember that Jesus, that is real. That is real
Right.
in terms of what's really happened. And so to your point, that when we bring mysticism and the body together, when we're doing that kind of work, that's where we get the fullness of Genesis 2:7.
Hmm.
But we do, like, I mean, evil will want to do this, right? For those of us who for whom we are uncomfortable with our body, or you know, if you grew up in a house like I did, where like we never talked about sex, we didn't, you know, we kind of assumed that we all kind of know, but like we know, but nobody ever talks about this. You know, it's just easier to like stay in your head because the body is like it makes things uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But if you can be on the other side of the stream and you're like, well, you're just doing things with your body, you're completely comfortable, whatever, but you're not really ever paying attention to the inner. And so the material world is all that ever exists. And so you're not paying any attention to what I'm sensing and imaging, feeling internally. That Jesus would want to meet me there as well. I mean, evil loves to separate, divide, and conquer in this way.
Hmm.
And so what we're trying to do in this series is really remember that wisdom is what comes from the full symphony being brought together.
The integrated whole. That's what the integrated whole
Right
is,
on.
right?
Right. This is the orchestra. That's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I had two other thoughts,
Yeah.
and we can rock and roll through them. Okay, the one about Damar Hamlin, but the other one is like when the presence, I forget which one, well, I think it was Kurt, that we don't believe that our presence in the room matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about this. I'm single. And like a lot of times I'll talk with my friends and it's like, yeah, it would be fun to travel with someone. It would be fun to experience life with. But then I always say, what I really want is someone in the house, in my apartment, even if they're doing something else.
Yep.
It's like just to have their presence.
Yep.
And it's like, who would,
I totally, I told you guys that sometimes because I work here alone in my house, I sometimes go to a coffee shop. I don't talk to anybody, but just having people in the room is so helpful to me. It's really interesting. Why is that, Kurt? What's happening there?
Well, I think that there is a sense in which, like, and think about it, when you go to a coffee shop, like you could pick any number of different places. Like you don't go to a construction site, you know, and nor do you go to a library.
No.
Right.
Oh,
there is
interesting.
Right. There is a sense in which we want to be in a place, like a coffee shop is a place where people kind of generally know that this is a place where people are coming for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming, and there is an artistic thing that's happening here, right? They're making coffee, we're drinking coffee, we're having conversation. There is some sense in which we are being present. We are not being loud and we're not being
Engaging.
destructive in that sense, right? Exactly. And at the same time, like if there's an assumption that like I can be here and do my work and I'm not irritating other people, and other people are, they can see that I'm doing my work. They know, because this is what people do here. They're not going to. So it's like this hospitable place where you can come, and we want you here, and we want you to be here doing what you're doing. You know, it's interesting when our kids were, I don't know, Pepper, if this was what this was like for you when your kids were mostly teenagers. When our kids were teenagers, there was this sense in which when they would come home from school, if they're around, they didn't really want to have much to do with us, but they did not want us leaving the house.
Oh,
they wanted to know that we were in the house. Just don't bother me.
It's
Don't
funny. I
talk to me.
experience it. With Hope, my youngest, I still, she'll be like, are you going somewhere? And I'm thinking, what does it matter? You're going to be in your room for the rest of the next 3 hours. You're not going to know if I'm here or not. She's like, well, okay, but how long are you going to be gone? Or are you going to be home when I get home? So it's so interesting. Yep. They want your presence. They want to know you're there, and I'm sure it's partly to do with safe and secure and all that.
And it changes the room. It changes the room.
Changes the room.
It does.
Yeah.
It absolutely changes the room.
Interesting.
Yeah. Go.
Damar.
Yeah.
Like when you were talking, we were all talking about, you guys were talking about the coach saying, I need to be with my player. And the fans going to the hospital, and Cincinnati team and fans. Like I got choked up, and I thought, and so did you, Kurt. It's like, then I thought, why do we get choked up? And is it because we're seeing somebody, because we're waiting for somebody to come after us, right? And so when we see that happen elsewhere, it's moving, right? It didn't even happen to us. Nobody came for us. I mean, in that moment, they were going, right. You know what I mean?
And what's interesting is the most important thing to these men when they arrived there was to play this game and win this game. That was the most important thing. And then this happened, and that all changed. All their priorities in that moment just completely changed.
Yeah. Well, and I think about, again, like I think of two things. One, like, come for me, and I need to know, because I'm sure there is a part of me that is aware. Like Damar Hamlin would never in a million years, players are not walking around thinking, there's that chance that I could have a cardiac arrest if I get blunt trauma to the chest. Like nobody's thinking that. Nobody's thinking that. They'll think it now. They'll think it now. But the point is that like he's not thinking of that. In the same way that there are parts of me that I'm not paying attention to, but that I suspect feel that fragile. And it's like, it's not just a question of like, will you come for me, but will you come for me when I am at death's door? I need to know that you will come for me when what I need is CPR. I don't just need, a little help carrying some groceries in. Right. Desperate. And the other thing that strikes me is, I'm watching ESPN, and even the broadcast studio is like, they don't know what to do with themselves.
They have no idea what to do.
Oh my gosh.
They have no idea. Like the amount of time spent where nobody was speaking. Yeah. That just never happens. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do.
Just kept saying over and over again, I have no words. I have no words.
Right. And then they would say like, our thoughts and prayers are with you. Right. So interesting. Right. Because we all get kind of, that's a euphemism for like, we're just like, I have all these things that we don't know what to do with. But the fans in Cincinnati didn't just send their thoughts and their prayers. They took their bodies to the hospital.
Right.
The coach didn't say, well, we'll keep playing, but we can be with Damar in our feelings. No, I'm taking my body to be with my player at the hospital. And I think yeah, it just really reminds me of how infinitely significant our presence is
Mhm.
and how often we miss it. How often we're not aware that, like, my presence, just being with you
Mhm.
in an embodied way, matters. And in this particular moment, it might not, because you might not need CPR at the moment.
Mhm.
It's easy for me to think like my presence doesn't really matter that much here.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Like a parent, like Hope. I just want to. I would just like to go and do my work at the coffee shop. And she's like, no, 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 no. Right? Like, I'm like, I don't get, like, how does my presence matter? I'm down here, like, you're like somewhere else in the house, like, you're not going to see me. What? Like, yeah,
Matters.
it matters.
Hmm.
And so I would say, like, this is part of the built-in fabric of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Like, when God says in when it is written about us in Ecclesiastes 3 that he's put eternity in our hearts, it's like saying he has put himself in who we are.
Mhm.
And that means that if we are embodied creatures, we are eternity that has been embodied. And that means that that's the kind of impact that we have. It is our sin, if you will. It is my trauma and my shame that prevents me from seeing who I am.
Mhm.
That does not then enable me to know that my very presence, my smile, my tone of voice, my embodied me is going to be living, breathing wisdom for whoever else is in the room. So that's why I need you guys to be in my life to help. That's why we need each other to draw this
Mhm.
forward, to
Right.
feel felt, to be known, in order for us to become aware of and awake to the wisdom that our bodies bring.
That's great.
Yeah, good stuff.
Hmm.
All right. Anything else, Aim?
That's it.
Okay. Thanks, you guys.
All right, folks. Love you.
You too.
Love you
Until
too.
next time.